Ever wondered how air coolers work? Well, you're not alone. In fact, air coolers are an essential part of our lives, whether we realize it or not. These devices help to maintain a comfortable temperature in our environments, especially during those hot summer months. Air coolers have been around for quite a while, and they've evolved a lot over the years. Despite their technological advancements, the basic principle remains the same. They cool air through the process of evaporation. But how does this process actually work? What are the key components involved, and how do they come together to give us that refreshing, cool breeze that we so cherish? All these questions and more will be answered in the course of this video. We'll delve into the mechanics of air coolers, exploring their various components and how they function. So, buckle up and get ready for a fascinating journey into the world of air coolers. By the end of this video, you will have a clear understanding of how air coolers function. An air cooler is more than just a box that blows out cool air. It's a finely tuned machine with various components, each playing a vital role in the process of cooling. Let's delve into the basic parts that make up an air cooler: the water tank, cooling pads, fan, and pump. First up is the water tank. This is where the cooling process begins. The water tank stores water, which is used to moisten the cooling pads. The size of the tank determines how long the cooler can operate before needing a refill. Larger tanks allow for longer operation times, while smaller tanks might need to be refilled more frequently. Next, we have the cooling pads. These pads act like a sponge, absorbing water from the tank. When air is pulled through these wet pads, it cools down. The thickness and material of the cooling pads can greatly affect the efficiency of the cooler. Thicker pads tend to provide better cooling as they can retain more water. The third component is the fan. This is the part that circulates the cool air out into the room. It pulls in warm air from the environment, pushes it through the moist cooling pads, and then blows the cooled air out. The speed of the fan can often be adjusted to control the amount of cool air being circulated. Lastly, we have the pump. This component circulates water from the tank to the cooling pads, ensuring they remain moist. It's like the heart of the cooler, pumping life-giving water to its various parts. Each component plays a unique and essential role in the cooling process. The water tank provides the water, the pump circulates it to the cooling pads, the fan pulls in warm air and pushes it through the wet pads, and finally, the cooled air is blown out into the room. Now that we know the basic parts, let's examine how these parts work together to cool the air. The working principle of an air cooler is actually quite simple. Have you ever noticed how you feel cooler when a breeze blows across your skin after you've been swimming or sweating? That's evaporative cooling at work, and it's the same principle that powers an air cooler. So let's dive into it. Evaporative cooling is a process that uses the heat in the air to evaporate water, which in turn cools the air. This is the fundamental principle that drives an air cooler. The cooler leverages this natural phenomenon to provide a drop in temperature that can make your room significantly more comfortable on a hot day. Now let's take a closer look at how this works in an air cooler. Inside the cooler, there's a water tank and a pump. The pump's job is to circulate water from the tank onto something called cooling pads. These are special pads designed to absorb and hold a large amount of water. As the pump circulates the water, these cooling pads become thoroughly wet. Then there's a fan. This is not just any fan, it's a powerful one, designed to pull in hot air from the outside. This hot air is then passed over the wet cooling pads. As the hot air comes into contact with the cooling pads, it causes the water in the pads to evaporate. Remember the principle of evaporative cooling we discussed earlier? This is where it comes into play. As the water evaporates, it absorbs heat from the air, causing the air to cool down. This cooler air is then blown out into the room by the fan. This cycle repeats itself, ensuring a continuous flow of cool air. It's an efficient and effective way to cool a room, and all thanks to the simple, natural process of evaporation. And there you have it, the working principle of an air cooler demystified. So the secret to an air cooler's cooling ability is the simple process of evaporation. A crucial aspect of an air cooler's operation is proper ventilation. This might seem like a simple point, but it's one that plays an integral role in the overall functioning of an air cooler. So why is ventilation so important? Picture this. You're in a room with a single window and it's a hot day. You turn on your air cooler, hoping for some relief from the heat. The cooler starts to work, absorbing the hot air, passing it over water-soaked pads, and then blowing the cooled air back into the room. But here's the catch. Without sufficient ventilation, the cooler is essentially just recycling the same warm air. Now, imagine the same room, but with several windows open. As the cooler works, hot air is expelled out of the room through these windows, and fresh air is drawn inside. This constant circulation of air ensures that the space remains cool and comfortable. In essence, an air cooler needs a steady flow of fresh air to function properly. It works on the principle of evaporative cooling, and for this process to be effective, the air inside the room can't become overly saturated with moisture. If the air becomes too humid, the cooler loses its ability to reduce the temperature effectively. This is where ventilation comes into play. With the right amount of ventilation, stale, humid air is continually replaced with fresh, dry air. This allows the air cooler to maintain its cooling effect, ensuring that the room stays at a comfortable temperature. Remember, an air cooler is not an air conditioner. It doesn't cool air in a closed-loop system. Instead, it relies on the constant intake of fresh air from the outside. So to get the most out of your air cooler, make sure that your space is well ventilated. In conclusion, ventilation is not just a minor detail in the operation of an air cooler. It's a fundamental requirement for its optimal functioning. Without proper ventilation, an air cooler would merely circulate the same hot air, failing to cool your space effectively. Let's recap what we've learned about air coolers. It's been quite a journey, wouldn't you agree? We've delved into the world of air coolers, a simple yet ingenious invention that helps us beat the heat in an eco-friendly and energy-efficient manner. We started our exploration by understanding the basic components of an air cooler. Remember, an air cooler is not some complex, mysterious machine. It's made up of a few simple parts, each playing a crucial role in the cooling process. There's the water tank, the cooling pads, the fan, and the pump. All of these parts work together to create a cool, refreshing breeze. The water tank is essentially the lifeblood of the air cooler. It's where the water is stored, ready to be pumped up and soaked into the cooling pads. The size of the water tank determines how long the cooler can operate without needing a refill. Then we have the cooling pads, which are more than just spongy materials. These pads are designed to absorb water and allow air from the fan to pass through them. As the air travels through the saturated pads, it loses its heat to the water, which evaporates and cools the air. Next comes the fan, a component that doesn't just move air around. It's tasked with pulling in hot, dry air from the environment and pushing out the cooled air after it passes over the cooling pads. And let's not forget the pump, the unsung hero of the air cooler. It's responsible for circulating water from the tank to the cooling pads, ensuring they remain soaked and ready to cool the incoming air. After understanding the components, we delved into the working principle of an air cooler, which is based on the concept of evaporative cooling. This principle is a natural phenomenon that we see in our everyday life, like when we feel cooler as sweat evaporates from our skin. Similarly, as the hot air passes over the wet cooling pads, the water in the pads evaporates, taking away the heat and cooling the air. Finally, we highlighted the importance of proper ventilation in air cooler operation. Without adequate ventilation, the cool air produced by the cooler will just build up inside the room, making it humid and uncomfortable. Therefore, it's crucial to ensure there's a way for the hot air to escape and fresh air to enter. Understanding how air coolers function can help us use them more effectively and maintain them better. Stay cool, and until next time, remember, knowledge is power.